Welcome to Writers Den. I'm Brenda Joyce Patterson. Writers Den is a show that showcases and uncovers writers and all things literary in Polk County and beyond. Today we have Krystal Wilkinson. She's a poet, she's a novelist, and she does all kinds of things. I'm pretty impressed, actually. I'm pretty impressed. She's written a novel called The Birds of Opulence. She's written two collections of short stories called Blueberries, Blueberries and Water Street. And so we're going to go to Krystal right now. Welcome, Krystal.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
It's good to be here.
Yeah.
It's sunny here.
Yes, and I know that we were talking a little bit earlier. You said that you had just come back from some place that was like really cold. Where was
Yes.
that? Vermont? No.
Vermont was really cold. Baltimore was really cold. I thought that at some point it would be warm, and here I am
Right.
in Florida.
Well, you have to choose Florida for that.
That's right.
Yeah, you have to choose Florida for that. Well, by the time this show airs, you will have already done your fabulousness at the Lakeland Public Library, which will happen at this point just a few hours from now. And we, because I'm sort of speaking for Lakeland Public Library for a few seconds, since I work there, we decided to have you come because you talked about some things in your novel that doesn't get addressed as much as possibly it should. So could you tell us a little bit about your novel, The Birds of Opulence, and yeah.
Yeah, at the center of the novel, I think every novelist has a thread of truth.
Yes.
And I don't know what that says about Stephen King or Anne Rice and the things that they write.
Very true.
Because I think that, the heart of the human condition is part of what they do too. Mm-hmm. So for me, one of the things that sort of haunts me is this idea of mental illness. Well, not the idea of it, but the reality of mental illness, and especially mental illness in rural communities and mental illness in Black communities.
Right.
And so why was I interested in this subject? Because my mother was diagnosed as being a paranoid schizophrenic when she was 20 years old.
Wow.
So for many, many years, I had tried to walk around this subject. I tried to write essays about it. I tried to write poetry about it. Mm-hmm. Some of my short stories in the previous two books sort of dance around the subject a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to make it more front and center in this book, The Birds of Opulence. Right. So in this book, we're dealing with 3 generations of women in a particular family. So there's the daughter that's being born at the beginning of the novel, the mother who perhaps is suffering from postpartum depression, the grandmother who clearly has some issues that haven't been diagnosed, and then the great-grandmother who's the matriarch. Okay. So several generations, and the reason why I wanted to do several generations is because, there are things, sort of legacies that we pass on from generation to generation, and sometimes those are things that we can do something about, pathology or whipping our kids, or the way that we raise children and the ways that problems are dealt with in the family. And then there's some things that are in the blood that can't be helped, Right. Of course, mental illness is often passed down from generation to generation. So that's sort of the skeleton of the book, and it starts in 1962 and goes through 1995, following these 2 families in this small community.
Okay. Boy, that's heavy, as they say, but something necessary. I'm going to jump track just a small bit and then go back. Mm-hmm. I know that you deal with this heavy subject, a subject that's necessary, that needs to be talked about, but you do it in such a lyrical way, and I'm sure that comes from your poetry. Do you think so?
Yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm. I love poetry so much and love poets.
Me too.
And the reason why I don't have a volume of poetry, I write a lot of poetry, but I don't have a volume of poetry published is because the poets that I love, I don't feel like my poetry meets up to what I love. So with this novel in particular, and it happens some in my short story collections too, but in this novel, I struggled with this very small novel. It's, around 200 200 plus pages,
right.
which is not a typical novel length. It's much smaller. But I struggled with making it large and trying to make it into something that it really wasn't. And so the moment that I said that Krystal the poet, Krystal the nonfiction writer, and Krystal the fiction writer were the same person and the same writer, then it all came together.
I'm so glad that you said that. I too am a poet, and I also write nonfiction, and I am struggling with fiction. And I'm glad that you said about finally things coming together. I think that happens a lot with poets because the world that poets work in is a kind of small jewel-like something. And of course novels, a lot of novels are these big, broad, sprawling things. And it's kind of hard after you've honed all of your talents and polished yourself into this small, beautiful thing to make it much larger. So.
And I did, you know, with this novel, at one point it was a lot larger, but it really felt like it was coming from a false place.
Yes.
One, I'm dealing with memory and ancestral memory, so sometimes that's even on a spiritual level. And those things don't seem to lend themselves to this long expanse. And, you know, memory, I think, is attached to poetry. You know, we think in snippets, we think in lines, we think in images when you're remembering something.
Right.
And so when I sort of gave up the idea of publishing, what the publishing world wants, and tried to meet the book at its heart, then it seemed to take off and to work. And I really edited it the same way that I would
a poem?
A book of poetry. Or a poem, really.
Right.
Because I distilled the language, I boiled it down, I read it out loud.
Well,
sometimes I counted syllables as I was editing.
Interesting, interesting. Like I said, I'm in the middle of doing that sort of thing myself, trying to broaden or deepen, or however way you want to put it, to try fiction. And it makes me feel good as an encouragement that my impulses can work in a larger piece of work. Yeah. We have, at the library that I work at, we have a writing group. And I obviously, lots of people come that write in different arenas. And I always kind of worry if I'm giving them the information that they need. But what you just said there lets me know that I'm somewhat on the track of certainly telling them to be a little bit more authentic and not to just stretch and pull things out of spot.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, the novel that I'm working on now, I'm working on so many projects, will be more of a traditional novel.
Okay.
But I let this one be what it wanted to be. I mean, the next one will be lyrical too. I just can't stop doing that. But it'll be more traditional with a clear chapter by chapter, beginning, middle, and end kind of book. But this one just, and I think sometimes you have to listen to the story that you're trying to tell, and or the essay you're trying to write, or the poem you're trying to compose, and just try to be as truthful in the moment as you can. Because I mean, I had the words that made it more traditional, which would have made it more commercial, but it just did not meet with the subject.
It's not what the story was calling for.
Right.
Right. So you just said that you're working on other things. You shouldn't say that when someone's interviewing you. What things are you working on? Are you, first of all, when can we see a book of poetry?
Well, I'm not sure yet. I mean, I probably have enough for a book. They're sort of scattered. Not really. When I've stacked them up and started looking at them, they all seem to focus on rural African American life. So maybe that's enough of a theme, but I'm trying to separate them and see if it's just one book or if it's more than one, or if I need to write other poems in it to sort of fill out. I have a suite of poems about my grandfather, who was a farmer and a water witch.
Oh, yeah.
So that collection by itself, which is a suite of poems now and not a whole collection, but it's called The Water Witch.
Okay.
But I'm thinking about putting that all in one volume. But so there's those poems. My primary book that I'm working on now is a nonfiction book about my mother. I spoke earlier about
Yes.
sort of walking around the subject of her.
Right.
And she passed away in 2016.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
But I had been working on this book since 2014, and she was so excited. My mother was, you know, in addition to her mental illness, which she had eventually become medicated for and lived a good, full life.
Right.
And she knew I was a writer, and she was very proud of that. So, and then she knew and gave permission for me to write about her story.
Good.
So she was really focused on what photograph are you going to use of me, and what should I wear to the book signing.
Oh, I love it.
So that's the
Right.
book that's sort of the primary book that my agent is waiting on. But, you know, since she passed away, it's been really hard for me to dive back into the book. So what does a
Right.
writer do when they have writer's block? And I tell my students this all the time.
What do they do?
You jump to another subject.
Yes, that's what I do.
Yeah, you don't
Yes.
stop because
No.
you don't know what comes next.
Right.
It might not be the time to work on that particular
Right.
project. So I'm also working on another novel.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
You said so many things just then. Let me go back. You said that your grandfather was a water witch. Now, I think I know what that is. And a water witch is a person who can find water under the ground.
Yeah.
And did he use a dowsing stick?
Yeah. He
Okay,
did.
cool.
Yeah. So a dowser is another word for it.
Okay.
And he used to go, and I think it was a peach tree, and he would cut the branch,
Right.
and then he would go, and he actually, people would call him in our community and say, you know, we're about to dig a well.
Help us.
And
yeah.
he would go and tell people where to dig.
Right.
And he did a lot of those old sort of folk things. He was, people would come to him to remove a wart, or
Oh, yeah.
he would tell people what time of the year, what sign of the moon to plant things.
Right.
Or,
To get a good crop. Yeah.
He was the weatherman. How many more snows are we going to have? And all of those kind of things.
That is so amazing. Sometimes with our modern technology, our modern science, we kind of poo-poo those things.
Yeah.
But obviously, if he had people repeatedly coming to him, he knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
He would tell people when they should, you know, he'd tell a woman when she could cut her hair and it would grow back, and then he would tell a man when he can cut his hair and save some money on some haircuts for it not to grow back so
right.
quickly.
Interesting, yeah.
And, you know, people took all of that
Oh, yeah.
seriously and would come. We often had
Definitely.
people in our yard and on our porch, and people would stop him and ask him questions. And
That's fascinating.
yeah.
I love that. I do. I love that. You are so accomplished. I was reading in your biography, and I'm going to cheat. Got my cheat sheet here. You've had lots of awards and recognition and nominations. I just love it. It says here that you've been nominated for a Pushcart Prize, and that your short stories and poems and essays and what have you have appeared in publications like Oxford American. I really like Oxford American.
I do
That's a
too.
great magazine.
Yeah.
It's a great magazine. And look, I have to say this, it's like nominated for the Orange Prize and the Hurston Wright Legacy Award. You've got recognition from the Kentucky Foundation for Women, the Kentucky Arts Council, the Mary Anderson Center for the Arts, and it just keeps going and going and going. I want to say, how does it feel? How does it feel?
I feel very blessed. You know, I
Yeah.
do feel very blessed, and I think, you know, some of those have been in the past. The most recent ones were the Ernest Gaines Prize, and I think that's the one I'm most excited about. I feel really
Yes.
blessed by that, and you know, I always talk about my Appalachian heritage,
Right.
and when Birds came out in 2016, Birds of Opulence came out, I felt really blessed because I thought, oh, it's a quirky little book. I don't know if people are going to get it. But to have it recognized by one of the highest African American awards, and to also have it, it was Appalachian Book of the Year in 2016, and it won the Weatherford Award, those are both Appalachian prizes. And so when that happened, I thought, okay, that made me sort of whole, like both sides of my identity got it. That somebody out there understood what I was trying to do.
Oh, good.
And thought it worthy. So that made me feel really good.
Oh, definitely. We just had Wiley Cash come to Lakeland Public Library, and we talked a little bit about what he did, obviously. But one of the things that he did that is a perfect intersection with you is that he started a online book club, basically an international book club. And your book, The Birds of Opulence, was the first one in that. I mean,
yeah,
wow.
I was so excited about that. And then, I've never met Wiley. He just,
I can't believe
I think he sent me an email, or maybe he hit me up. He might have hit me up on Facebook.
Right.
And I knew who he was. New York Times bestseller. And
right.
He just said, I'm starting this book club, and I want to feature you. And so I thought it was just probably there in North Carolina. I didn't really think about it being a national book club. And so that was really exciting. And then once we started talking, I found out that he was a student of Ernest Gaines.
Of Ernest Gaines.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing,
too.
And
so all of those threads come to...
It's a nice circle.
Yeah.
I love when things circle together. And by the way, the name of that book club that her book was the first selection for is called Open Canon, and that's done by Wiley Cash. So, yeah. Just such exciting things.
Yeah.
Exciting things.
Yeah, and I think it's more exciting for me at this age. A lot of people did these things when they were 30, and I'm 50, and so to be able to continue after I finished raising children, and I have more time and can devote to my writing, and then to have that recognized makes me feel like it's never too late to do what you feel like you need to do.
I'm glad that you said that, because the culture, certainly the writing culture, lots of times makes it sound like if you haven't done everything by the time that you're 30, it's too late.
Right.
And who wants to hear that? Because sometimes life doesn't, sometimes life doesn't fit into those nice, neat little things.
Right.
And it is nice to know by looking at you and seeing all these wonderful things that you're doing, that there is time. There is time for us to do the work that we're here to do. And I thank you so much. I thank you. I can talk to you forever, but I have to close this.
Okay.
Darn. Darn.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. And this Krystal Wilkinson, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Writers Den.